Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now we begin. It started with a simple question. A question that shouldn't have haunted me, but did. Who filmed this? I woke up to the strange feeling of having missed something. My computer was on, the screen glowing faintly in the darkness of my room. The time was 3:30 in the morning, and I felt like something was wrong, though I couldn't pinpoint it. The air felt heavier than usual. The low hum of the computer was the only sound in the room, the quiet oppressive, like the world outside had disappeared. My eyes scanned the room, but everything seemed still. Too still. Yet the unease wouldn't leave. I opened my laptop. The screen blinked to life as I unlocked it, revealing a folder that I hadn't seen before. It was titled Videos. I didn't remember making any videos recently, let alone naming a folder like that. I clicked on the folder. The thumbnail of the video caught my attention immediately. The file name Night, there was something about it that looked lost. I hadn't recorded anything like this, but there it was, sitting in front of me like a clue I didn't want to follow. I hesitated before double-clicking. What could it be? An old recording. Maybe just a glitch. I reached for the mouse, my hand trembling. I told myself it was nothing, but why was I suddenly so afraid of the unknown file? The video started playing. At first, I couldn't understand what I was looking at. It was dark, almost pitch black. The camera was shaky, the kind of movement you would expect from someone holding their phone and walking in a hurry. The only thing visible was the outline of a figure moving in the dark. It looked like me, but that couldn't be true. I hadn't filmed anything, and I certainly hadn't been up at this time of night. My breath caught in my throat. The figure on the screen turned around, and I could barely make out the faint light reflecting off a face. It was mine. I froze. My body felt heavy, as if the weight of the video had begun to press down on me. I wasn't just watching something, I was a part of it. The same figure that looked back at me on the screen was standing somewhere in my room. My heart skipped. Was this some sort of sick joke? Had someone hacked into my computer? Was I being filmed without knowing? I turned around quickly, expecting to see someone hiding behind my door, but no one was there. Just the empty walls. I clicked the pause button, trying to regain some control. There had to be an explanation. A mistake, a weird glitch in the system. The video resumed, and this time the figure walked forward. The steps were deliberate, and I could see clearer now. It was me, sure, but why was the camera filming me? I didn't remember setting anything up. The angle was strange, too. It was like someone was following me, watching me. It felt wrong. And then I heard it. A faint sound in the video. A whisper just barely audible. It was like someone was speaking just behind me. I turned around again, my eyes darting from one corner of the room to the next. There was nothing. Just the shadows, too quiet, too still. But the video kept playing. The whisper grew louder, and I leaned closer to the screen. The words were garbled, but I could swear I heard something familiar. It sounded like my own name. I felt a cold sweat run down my spine as I closed my eyes. Well, it's just a mistake. Just a video glitch, I repeated in my mind, but my stomach churned. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in the room. The air felt colder, the silence sharper, like a knife. I shut the laptop. I needed to breathe. But I couldn't escape the image of that dark figure. Was it me? Or was it someone else? I couldn't tell anymore. I walked to the window, hoping to clear my mind. The night outside was quiet, too quiet. The streetlights flickered in the distance, and for a moment I thought I saw something. A shadow moving just beyond the reach of the streetlights, but when I looked harder, it was gone. I turned back to my desk. The laptop was closed, but something felt off. I couldn't remember leaving it that way. My hands trembled as I opened it again. The same folder, the same video file. I wanted to close it to forget about it, but my curiosity kept me from doing so. What did I see? What was real? I pressed play once more. The same shaky footage, the same dark room, the same figure. But this time, as the figure moved, I saw something else in the corner of the frame. A shape. A shadow slightly out of focus, but unmistakable. It was like something was following me. Something that wasn't me. My breath caught in my throat. I stopped the video and slammed the laptop shut. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Something was still watching. And now it knew I was watching back. The next few hours felt like an eternity. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the house. It was as if the walls themselves had started whispering. The sound of my own breath was deafening in the silence, and every creak from the old wooden floorboards sent a jolt through my body. I sat on the edge of my bed, my eyes fixed on the laptop, which was still closed on the desk. It was mocking me now, like some sort of sinister presence I couldn't escape. I had to get away from it, but my feet felt frozen in place. I kept replaying the video in my mind. The figure, myself or something else, walking through the dark room. It felt like it was happening right next to me, not on the screen. I could almost feel the cold air around me, the same chill from the video creeping under my skin. Had I been filmed? Or was there something else going on? The clock on the wall ticked louder than ever, each second dragging on. It was just past 5 in the morning now, but my mind refused to rest. I could hear every little noise, every rustle of paper, every gust of wind outside. But nothing felt natural anymore. Every sound seemed amplified, like the house itself was holding its breath. I couldn't stop myself. I had to know what was going on. I walked over to the desk slowly, as if I were approaching some dangerous creature. My hand hovered over the closed laptop for a moment before I finally opened it again. The folder with the videos was still there. But now something was different. The icon for the night video was blurry, flickering as if struggling to stay on the screen. I clicked on it again. The video resumed, but this time it wasn't just the shaky, dark footage of me. The frame seemed to distort, the edges warping as though the image was trying to escape. And then the whispering started again. But this time it was clearer. It wasn't just my name. It was a sentence. You're not alone. I jumped back, the chair scraping violently against the floor. My heart pounded in my chest and my hands were clammy. That couldn't be real. No one could have been in the room with me, filming me without me knowing. But how did it know? I closed the video, but the image of those words lingered in my mind. The whispering voice, distant yet intimate, haunted me. Something was wrong. No one else could have been in my room, yet the footage was clear. I wasn't crazy. The video was real. I needed answers. I searched through the rest of the files in the folder, hoping to find something, anything, that could explain what was happening. There were several more video clips, but they all looked just like the first one, dark, shaky footage with only vague outlines of movement. They were all time-stamped at odd hours of the night, all showing the same figure, the same me, wandering in the shadows of my own home. But the more I watched, the more I began to notice patterns. Small details that didn't make sense. In one video, the angle of the camera shifted, as if someone was adjusting it to get a better view of me. In another, there was a faint shadow moving in the background, almost imperceptible, but undeniably there. It looked like someone or something was following me. Not just from the outside of the frame, but blending into the edges of my own movements. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, warping into impossible shapes. I leaned closer to the screen, trying to make sense of it all. But with every second that passed, I felt like I was losing touch with reality. The room felt smaller, the shadows deeper. My mind raced to keep up, grasping at fragments of logic, but they slipped through my fingers like sand. There had to be an explanation. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe someone had been in the house before, a friend, a stranger even. But I couldn't remember anyone being here. No one had come in while I was asleep. No one had even knocked on my door. I hadn't heard any footsteps, no creaking floorboards, nothing. I reached for my phone and checked my security cameras. I had set them up around the house just in case. But when I opened the app, there was only static. The cameras had stopped recording at exactly the same time the video began. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just the video. Someone or something had taken control of everything. I wasn't just a witness to this strange reality, I was caught in it. The door to my bedroom cracked open. I froze, not daring to move. My eyes locked on the dark hallway beyond, where the shadows seemed to linger, stretching longer than they should. My mind screamed at me to move, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. The whispering grew louder in my ears, this time clear as day. You're not alone. And then I heard it. A soft, deliberate footstep just outside my door. I didn't want to look, but I had to. Slowly I turned my head, my breath catching in my throat. The hallway was empty. But the door, it was ajar. Just slightly, like someone had nudged it open. I hadn't opened it. I reached for the nearest object, a lamp, and gripped it tightly, my knuckles turning white. My heartbeat thundered in my chest, louder than the whispers, louder than anything else. I stood frozen for what felt like an eternity. And then I heard it again. The whisper. But this time it wasn't through the computer. It was in the room with me. You're not alone. The room was suffocating. I could feel the weight of the silence pressing in, suffocating every thought, every breath. The whispers, now louder, were no longer coming from the screen. They surrounded me, filled the space like a cloud of unseen voices. I felt my pulse in my throat, my hands trembling with the lamp in my grip. The door was still slightly open, the shadows in the hallway stretching like dark fingers reaching towards me. I had to do something. I couldn't just stand here waiting for whatever this was to consume me. "Who's there?" my voice cracked, weak in the overwhelming silence. No response. But that whispering. It was like a chant now, rhythmic, persistent. "You're not alone," over and over again, each repetition digging deeper into my skull. It felt like something was trying to pull me into the dark. I couldn't make sense of it. Nothing made sense anymore. I hesitated, but the urge to confront whatever was lurking in the hallway became overpowering. It had been too long. The air was too still, too thick. I had to know what was happening. Slowly I stood up, keeping my grip tight on the lamp. I stepped cautiously toward the door, each step making the floor creak beneath my feet. The room felt smaller with each movement, as if the walls were closing in on me. My breath was shallow, my chest tight. I reached the door and pushed it open just enough to peek through the crack. Nothing. The hallway was empty, just the faint glow of the moonlight creeping through the windows, casting long shadows along the walls. For a moment I almost convinced myself that this was all in my head, a product of too much fear, too much uncertainty. Maybe it was the video, maybe the stress was getting to me. But then, as I stepped out into the hallway, I saw something that stopped me dead in my tracks. There was a shape at the far end, near the staircase. It was too dark to make out clearly, but it was there, standing perfectly still. Watching. I felt my heart stop. The shadows seemed to warp around it, twisting unnaturally, like they were trying to conceal it from my view. My body tensed, every muscle ready to run, but my feet were frozen in place. The figure remained motionless, a part of the darkness itself. I blinked, trying to focus, but as soon as I opened my eyes, the figure was gone. Vanished, just like that. I rushed forward, my feet pounding against the floor, my mind screaming for me to turn back. But I couldn't stop now. The figure was real, I knew it was. It wasn't a trick of the light or my imagination. It was here. I reached the staircase and stopped. There was no sign of anyone or anything. Just the quiet hum of the house settling, the distant rustle of the wind outside. I turned back to the room. The door was now fully open, and something caught my eye. The laptop still on the desk was glowing, flickering in and out like it was malfunctioning. I could feel the pull of it, like it was calling me back. The video. I wanted to ignore it, to leave this nightmare behind, but something stopped me. I couldn't turn away. There was an undeniable need to understand, to find out what was happening. I went back into the room, the hallway now feeling even more oppressive, the shadows thicker and darker than before. The whispering returned louder, now a cacophony of voices, all speaking in unison. You're not alone. It wasn't just one voice anymore. There were many layered over each other, growing louder with each second. I sat back at my desk, my hands trembling as I opened the laptop again. The screen flickered, then stabilized, showing the same folder I had seen earlier. The video file was still there, untouched. I clicked on it and it began to play once more. But this time something was different. The video was clearer, sharper. I could see more now. The figure wasn't just moving through the darkness, it was watching me. In every frame it seemed to get closer, inching its way toward the camera. Its eyes, if you could even call them eyes, were dark, empty voids. And in the distance, just beyond the figure, I could see something else. A shadow, larger, more defined. I leaned in closer, my breath catching in my throat. Was this real? How could it be? I reached for the pause button, but as my hand hovered over it, the video froze on its own. The figure was now just inches away from the camera. Its face, or what could pass for a face, was obscured by shadows, but I could feel its presence, like it was right in front of me, watching me in real time. Then I heard it again. The whisper, behind you. I whipped around, my eyes scanning the room, my heart pounding in my chest. The door was still wide open, but no one was there. I turned back to the screen. The figure was gone, but something had changed. The shadows in the room, the ones that had been static before, were now moving. Subtle at first, but unmistakable. They were shifting, curling like tendrils creeping along the walls. The room itself seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with the rhythm of my heart. My phone buzzed. I snapped it up, desperate for a distraction. It was a message from a friend, Tim. Hey man, are you okay? You've been acting weird lately. I've been trying to reach you for hours. I stared at the message, trying to make sense of it. I hadn't spoken to him in days, but his words felt out of place. I quickly typed back, fingers shaking. What do you mean? I haven't been acting weird. There was a pause before he replied. You don't remember, do you? You sent me a video last night. It was. But it was. You said you were going to check out the old house. What happened? I felt a chill run down my spine. The old house. But I hadn't sent him anything. I hadn't even gone anywhere. The whispering grew louder again, and this time it wasn't just in the video. It was everywhere. The shadows were closing in, the room felt smaller. The screen flickered one last time, and then the video continued. This time the figure was standing right behind me. I could feel its presence as though it had stepped out of the screen into the room with me. Run. I didn't need to be told twice. My heart pounded in my chest as I scrambled to my feet, my mind racing, but every instinct screamed that I needed to move now. I couldn't think, couldn't process everything at once. The whisper was relentless, suffocating me in the thick air of the room. Run, the voice was clear now, urgent, demanding. It wasn't just the video anymore. It was in the walls, in the air, in the room with me. I looked around the room, searching for an escape. The shadows seemed to shift as if alive, moving in unnatural patterns, swallowing up the corners of the room. My legs felt like they were made of lead, but I forced them to move, dragging myself toward the door. I could still hear the whisper, now mingling with the sound of my breath, the rapid beating of my heart. It wasn't just a whisper anymore, it was a roar echoing in my mind. Run, run, run. I burst into the hallway, my footsteps pounding against the floor, each step feeling heavier than the last. The house stretched out before me like a labyrinth, the familiar walls now twisting and distorting. Every shadow seemed to reach toward me, as if the house itself were alive and trying to hold me captive. The stairs creaked beneath my weight as I rushed down, not bothering to check my footing. The entire staircase seemed to groan under the pressure, the wood bending and snapping like a warning. My eyes flickered to the living room, the dim light from the street lamp outside barely cutting through the darkness. The room felt colder now, the air thick with tension. I couldn't stay here. I needed to get out. But just as I reached the door to the living room, something stopped me. A figure. It was standing in the doorway, blocking my exit. It was dark, barely visible in the shadows, but it was there. A tall, imposing figure watching me, unmoving. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I froze. Who, I started, but my voice caught in my throat. The figure didn't answer. It didn't need to. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls shifting, breathing. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and I realized I wasn't alone. The figure wasn't the only one. There were others just out of my line of sight, hiding in the darkness, their shapes barely visible, shifting with the shadows. I had to move. I turned on my heels, heart racing, and bolted back into the hallway. But this time I didn't know where to go. The house, once familiar, now felt like a maze. The hallway stretched endlessly before me, the walls closing in on either side. My breath was coming in sharp gasps, my pulse pounding in my ears. I turned left, then right, running, but it felt like I was chasing my own footsteps. No matter how fast I moved, the house was never ending. The floor beneath me began to shift. The ground trembled slightly, as if the very foundation was starting to break apart. The air grew colder, and I could feel the weight of the presence surrounding me, suffocating, closing in. The whispers were now a cacophony, surrounding me from every direction. Not much longer. The voice came from behind me. I spun around, my pulse spiking again, but there was no one there. Just darkness. The darkness itself was growing, expanding, and I felt it creeping closer, wrapping around me. The shadows weren't just shadows anymore. They had form, shape, and malice. They were reaching for me, their tendrils curling and slithering across the floor. I tried to run, but my legs were heavy. Every step felt like I was wading through tar. The walls of the house were no longer straight, they curved inward, narrowing. The space was shrinking, the ceiling descending lower and lower. The living room was just ahead, but something was wrong. The door was shut tight now, as though it had never been opened. I reached for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if the house itself was locking me in. My hand trembled against the cold, smooth surface of the door. I backed away, my heart racing, my head spinning. The whispers were now a roar, deafening. Run, they urged again, before it's too late. But I couldn't leave. The house was alive now, alive and watching. and I knew it was closing in on me. There was no escape. The shadows had already taken over. I heard a movement behind me, footsteps, slow and deliberate. I whipped around, my body tensing, and there it was. The figure again, standing in the hallway, its form now more defined. I could see its face, or what was left of it. It was a mask, hollow and dark, with empty eyes staring right through me. And then I saw it, the thing that had been following me from the beginning. It wasn't a figure, not just a shadow, but something far worse. It was a hole, a dark, gaping hole in reality itself. And it was growing. The space around me began to distort, the room tearing at the edges, as if the house was unraveling itself. The hole grew larger, swallowing up everything in its path, pulling me toward it. I tried to move, tried to run, but I was rooted to the spot, my body paralyzed by the suffocating presence of whatever this thing was. I looked up, but the ceiling was gone, replaced by nothingness, an endless void. And then I felt it. A cold hand on my shoulder. I didn't dare turn around. But the whispering voice was right behind me now, so close I could feel it against my ear, its words like ice, "You're not alone." The floor beneath me gave way, and I felt myself falling, tumbling into the darkness. I reached out, trying to grab onto something, anything. But there was nothing. Just darkness, and the whispers. I fell. The darkness swallowed me whole, and the world around me disintegrated into a void of nothingness. I couldn't tell up from down, left from right. My body felt weightless, suspended in some endless chasm. The air was thick with the sound of whispers, drowning out everything else, a suffocating buzz that vibrated deep in my chest. The fall seemed eternal, but it wasn't just falling. It was a slow unraveling, as if the very fabric of reality was pulling apart, thread by thread. Each second felt like a year, the darkness pressing in tighter. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I just fell. I wanted to scream, but my voice was lost in the void. My hands clawed at the air, reaching for something to hold on to, but there was nothing. There was nothing but the relentless pull of the darkness. And then I stopped. For a moment I thought I had died. The sensation of falling vanished, replaced by a strange stillness. The whispers had gone silent, as though they were holding their breath, waiting. I was suspended in a space that didn't feel real, a place that was neither here nor there. I opened my eyes, expecting to see nothing but blackness, but there was something. Faint like the glow of distant stars, flickering in the edges of my vision. A soft light. I blinked again, trying to focus, and suddenly the light grew stronger. It wasn't stars, though, it was something else. Something alive. A swirling pattern shifting like smoke, like liquid shadows in the air. I tried to move, but my body was still frozen, trapped in this strange, suspended state. The light pulsed, drawing closer, and with it came a cold, overwhelming presence. A voice. It wasn't the whispers anymore. It was clear, sharp, and familiar. Welcome back. The words echoed around me, reverberating through the darkness like a physical force. I couldn't place the voice, but I knew it. Deep down, I knew it. The voice wasn't mine, but it felt like it belonged to me, as though it had always been a part of me. I tried to respond, but my mouth wouldn't move. It felt like my entire being was trapped in a cage, unable to act, unable to break free. You were always meant to come here, the voice continued, its tone cold and distant. Well, you can't escape it. Not anymore. I fought against the paralysis, pushing with all my strength, but it was like trying to move through thick mud. The light was growing, filling the space with its unnatural glow. I could see it now, shapes, faint outlines, flickering in and out of existence. Figures, not just one, many, and they were all staring at me. The light continued to swirl, a hypnotic, disorienting dance that pulled at my senses, making everything feel unreal. And then I understood. The figures, the whispers, the video. It had all led me here to this moment. To this place. It wasn't just a house. It wasn't just a recording. This place was alive. And it had been watching me, pulling me deeper into its web from the very first time I had watched that video. It was all connected. Every shadow, every whisper, it had all been building toward this. Do you understand now? The voice was closer, almost a whisper in my ear. But there was no body, no figure. Just the oppressive presence that filled every inch of the space. I wanted to scream, to fight, to demand answers. But my body remained still, like I was trapped in some kind of dream. Your fear, it feeds us. It always has, the voice continued, its tone colder now. You were never meant to be free. You were always meant to stay. The words hung in the air like a final verdict, sinking into my very soul. I couldn't breathe. The light grew blinding, and with it, the figures around me seemed to shift, their shapes warping and distorting into grotesque forms. I tried to close my eyes, but they wouldn't shut. The light was too strong. The figures were closing in, circling around me, their movements quick and jerky, like marionettes on strings. Each movement was accompanied by a faint, rattling noise, as if something was scratching at the walls of reality itself. Welcome to the end, the voice said, and this time I felt it deep in my chest. A chill spread through my body, and I understood. There was no escape. The house, the video, the whispers, it had all been part of this. Part of the pull that had dragged me here. The figures were no longer distant, no longer just shadows. They were here right in front of me, their cold, hollow eyes staring into mine, empty and knowing. I could feel their gaze like a weight pressing on me, suffocating me. One by one, the figures reached out, their hands elongated and twisted, fingers that looked too long, too sharp. They reached for me, pulling me closer, their touch cold like ice. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. All I could do was stare as they closed in around me. The last thing I saw was the darkness swallowing everything, the figures, the light, the space itself. All of it. And then, nothing. I woke up. It wasn't the same. The air was heavy with something wrong. My eyes snapped open, and I found myself back in the same room, in front of the same screen. The video was still playing, the file opened before me, but it was different now. I wasn't alone anymore. I could feel it. Something was watching. I turned slowly, heart pounding, but the room was empty. The shadows stretched just like before, but this time they felt closer. The whispers began again. Quiet at first, then louder. You're not alone. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like, but if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. Have you ever heard a sound that doesn't belong? A melody that reaches inside of you, tugging at the very edges of your sanity. I did, and now every night I listen for it. It started 3 weeks ago, just after I moved into the old house on Willow Lane. The house was quiet. Too quiet if I'm being honest. The kind of place that looked abandoned even though it was. My friends said I was being dramatic when I told them I felt something was off, but there was something in the air, something that didn't belong. I thought maybe it was just the isolation. A new town, a new start. My old life had been full of noise, full of chaos, and I was craving peace. So I found this house. A small 2-story with ivy creeping up the walls, the windows covered in thick curtains. The landlord had been oddly eager to hand over the keys, but I didn't think much of it at the time. The first night was calm. No sounds, no interruptions. Just the wind rustling the trees outside and the occasional creak of the house settling. But by the second night, I heard it. The faintest of melodies coming from somewhere deep inside the house. At first, I thought it was just the wind or some noise I wasn't used to. But no, there was a distinct tune, like a piano playing. It wasn't loud. In fact, it was almost whispering through the walls. But I could hear it clear as day, despite the silence that surrounded me. The sound was distant at first, like it was coming from the other side of the house. But the longer I listened, the closer it seemed to get. Slowly, like a slow drip of water falling from a great height, each note carrying a weight that pressed on my chest. It wasn't a song I recognized. It wasn't a tune I had ever heard. But there was something about it that felt wrong. I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest as the melody danced through the air. I was drawn to it. I told myself to ignore it. That it was just my imagination. That it was the house creaking and groaning in its age. But the longer it played, the harder it became to believe that explanation. I tried to locate the sound. I moved through the house. Each step I took seemed to echo louder than the last, making the melody even more unnerving. The old hardwood floor creaked beneath my feet, the walls whispering around me, as though the house itself were trying to hide something. The sound was coming from the basement. I froze when I realized where it was coming from. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't planned on going down there. The landlord had mentioned it was just a storage space. It was cold, he said. Dark. I didn't need to look at it. But the music, it wouldn't stop. It clawed at my mind, each note becoming more insistent, louder. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The stairs to the basement were narrow, winding down into the dark. I reached for the light switch, but the bulb flickered to life only momentarily before dying again. The only light came from the hallway behind me, stretching long and thin down the staircase. I hesitated, staring down into the darkness. The air felt colder now, thick and heavy. Something wasn't right. I could feel it, but I had to know what it was. I had to know why the music was playing. With my breath shallow, I descended. Each step creaked beneath me, but the music kept playing, now clearer than before. It was as if it was waiting for me, inviting me closer. I reached the bottom of the stairs, and my eyes slowly adjusted to the dark. A single beam of light filtered in from the top of the stairs, illuminating a dusty old armchair and a row of forgotten boxes along the wall. Then I saw it. The piano. It wasn't there before. There had been nothing in the basement when I first moved in. But now a grand piano stood in the center of the room. Its keys gleamed softly in the dim light, as though they had been waiting for me to notice them. And then the music stopped. Dead silent. I didn't know what to do. The house felt suffocating. The air was thick, every sound amplified. My eyes darted around the room, looking for something, anything, that would make sense of this. But there was nothing. Just the piano and the heavy silence. Suddenly there was a sound from behind me. A creak, a footstep. I spun around, but no one was there. It was just my mind playing tricks on me. I told myself that, over and over again. But the silence in the room felt too unnatural, too oppressive. The weight of it pressed down on me. And then the piano played again. This time the melody was different. It was slower, more mournful, as though it was weeping. I stepped back, my pulse racing. My hand found the wall beside me, but my feet were frozen. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The music, it wasn't just a melody. It was calling to me, drawing me in closer and closer until I couldn't tell where the sound ended and my thoughts began. And that's when I heard it. A whisper, soft at first, barely audible. But it grew louder until it felt as if it were right next to me, in my ear. I couldn't make out the words, but I could feel them. The words wrapped around my mind, dragging me deeper into the dark. My body trembled, and for the first time, I wondered if I was losing my mind. Or if there was something else, something far darker, waiting in the shadows of the house. I turned to run, but my feet stumbled over something, an old book, thick and ancient. My fingers brushed it as I reached for the stairs. The book fell open, its pages worn and faded, and there, scrawled in the margins, was a single word. Listen. I didn't want to listen. Not anymore. I ran up the stairs, the music chasing me. I slammed the basement door shut behind me, my chest heaving, but the music didn't stop. It was as though it had followed me, seeping through the very walls of the house. The soft, mournful tune wrapped around my mind like a vice, making my every step feel weighted, burdened by the oppressive air that hung in the house. I stood at the top of the stairs, staring down at the closed basement door, my heart hammering in my chest. The whisper, the one that had brushed against my ear, was still in my mind. I couldn't shake it. The sensation that something was watching me, something was waiting for me, wouldn't leave. It lingered like the shadow of a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I grabbed my phone from my pocket, hands shaking as I tried to dial the landlord's number. I needed someone to explain what was happening. I needed to know that this wasn't real. But before the call could even ring, the screen flickered and the music began again. It was louder now. Clearer. The soft melody turned sharp and discordant, every note like a finger scraping across glass. I spun around, my eyes scanning the dark hallway. Every shadow seemed to deepen, stretch longer than it should have, as though the darkness itself were alive, reaching out for me. Why is this happening? The thought clawed at my mind. Why couldn't I just ignore it? Why couldn't I just leave? But every time I tried to move, the pull of the music, the whispers, seemed to ground me in place. I couldn't escape. I couldn't stop listening. I pressed my hands against my ears, trying to block it out. But it only grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't coming from the basement anymore. No, now it felt like it was coming from all around me. The walls themselves seemed to hum with it, the sound vibrating through the very air. I backed into the living room, my eyes darting from corner to corner, searching for any sign of something, anything that might explain this madness. But there was nothing. Just the room. The same room where I had been sitting peacefully only hours ago. Then I heard it again. The whisper, clearer this time and louder. You can't escape. I froze. The voice was coming from the walls. The walls. I glanced around, but there was nothing there. No one there. Just the silence of the house, now broken only by the unnatural sound of the music and the whispers that seemed to seep from every crack in the room. I took a step back, my feet catching on the edge of the coffee table. I stumbled, grabbing onto it for support. But as I did, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The furniture had shifted. It wasn't much, just a few inches, but enough to be noticeable. The couch, the chairs, the coffee table, all had moved just slightly, as though something had been in the room with me, and it had rearranged everything while I wasn't looking. I backed away slowly, my breath shallow, my eyes still scanning the room. The air had become thicker, colder, as though the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in the span of a few seconds. The music continued. Louder now. I couldn't make out the notes anymore. It was a cacophony, a twisted distortion of sound that grated against my nerves. The whispers came again, soft, like a caress against my skin. We're waiting. I turned and ran toward the door. But before I could reach it, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A figure, a shadow. It was standing just beyond the hallway, barely visible in the dim light. The shape was tall and thin, its edges jagged like it was made of shadows themselves. I froze. The figure didn't move. It just stood there watching me. You can't leave, the whisper came again, only this time it was louder, more forceful. The voice seemed to come from the shadow itself, as if the figure was speaking directly into my mind. Panic surged through me, and for a moment I couldn't move. My legs felt like stone. My chest tightened, each breath coming in shallow, desperate gasps. But then something snapped. The instinct to survive kicked in. I turned, racing toward the door, throwing it open and stumbling out onto the front porch. The music, the whispers, everything stopped. I stood on the porch, the cold night air biting at my skin. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. The house loomed behind me, dark and silent, as though nothing had happened. As though I had imagined it all. But I knew it wasn't real. I knew that the house had shifted, that the music hadn't stopped. That something was still inside, I needed help. I needed answers. But I didn't know who to turn to. Everyone I knew was miles away. I couldn't even explain this to anyone, let alone expect them to believe me. Who would? I turned back toward the house, the door still wide open behind me. And as I looked into the darkness, I saw something move. A figure, tall, thin, and smiling. Come back. I ran. I don't remember how I got back inside the house. The next thing I knew, I was standing at the threshold, staring into the pitch-black hallway. The door had slammed behind me with a finality that sent shivers down my spine. The house felt like a living thing, breathing with a rhythm that matched the eerie music echoing in the walls. The soft, distorted melody began again, rising and falling like a heartbeat that I could neither escape nor ignore. I wasn't alone anymore. The whispering had stopped, but the music, that relentless, oppressive sound, was louder now. It didn't come from one direction. No, it came from everywhere, filling the entire house. It was as though the walls themselves were alive, vibrating with the notes, and the sound poured from every crack and corner, impossibly omnipresent. I wanted to run, to tear down the hallway and flee, but something held me in place. Fear, yes, but something else too. A pull, a weight pressing on my chest, making each breath feel like an impossible task. The house had a grip on me now. It wasn't just the fear of what I couldn't see, it was the knowledge that I was trapped. I glanced back over my shoulder, half expecting to see the shadowy figure I'd glimpsed before. But there was nothing. The hallway was empty, save for the dark corners that seemed to stretch just a little too far into the shadows. A sudden shift in the music made my heart skip a beat. It wasn't just a melody anymore. The tune had morphed, twisted into something more sinister. It was now an eerie dissonance, a jumbled mess of notes that struck against each other like broken glass. Every sound was a jarring scrape, a harsh vibration against my nerves. And then through the cacophony, a single clear note rang out as though calling my name. Come. I froze, my legs turning to stone beneath me. The word was unmistakable, clear as day, spoken with an impossible clarity. A voice that wasn't human, yet somehow familiar, like a memory buried deep in my mind. The kind of voice that clung to you, slipping through your thoughts like smoke, distorting reality itself. I wasn't alone. Something was in the house with me. I took a cautious step back, trying to steady my breath. The floor creaked underfoot, the house groaning as though it were aware of my every movement. It was alive. The walls, the floor, everything felt wrong. I had to get out, but every instinct screamed that the door wasn't the way. I heard something shift behind me, the faintest scrape of fabric against wood. My heart pounded in my chest, every beat a loud reminder that I was not alone in this suffocating silence. I whirled around, my eyes scanning the hallway, but saw nothing. Just the shadows, long and distorted in the dim light. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the figure was closer. Too close. I reached for the door handle, my fingers trembling. The house seemed to shift again. The walls creaked, and for a moment I thought I saw something move in the corner of my vision, a tall, thin shape. A shadow with no source. Just the darkness itself. A lave. The voice, the same disembodied whisper, sent a chill of terror down my spine. I snapped my head toward the stairs. The sound was coming from below, just beyond the basement door, where the whispers had begun in the first place. I didn't even think. My legs moved before my mind could catch up, racing toward the basement door. The handle was cold to the touch, the metal slick with some unseen moisture. As my fingers wrapped around it, a searing electric jolt shot up my arm. My pulse quickened. The music, still discordant, grew louder, sharper, as if it were coming from the very bowels of the house. I pulled the door open, but there was no basement to be seen. Instead, the stairs seemed to stretch downward, further and further into the darkness. The air down there felt wrong, thick and choking, as if something had been waiting for me. Waiting to pull me in. I took one step, then another. The steps creaked under my weight, the sound reverberating through the empty air. The music had reached a fever pitch now, so loud, so all-consuming, that it seemed to seep into my very thoughts. The shadows in the stairwell shifted, and I saw them, two figures, standing just beyond the reach of the flickering light. I could make out their shapes, but not their faces. They were tall, impossibly thin, their limbs too long. Their features were obscured by the shadows, as though their very presence was a distortion in the fabric of reality. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Come closer. The voice again. It was everywhere, seeping through the walls, through my very thoughts, until it filled my mind entirely. I could hear it, feel it, like a breath on my skin. It was real. It had to be. I forced my legs to move, stumbling down the stairs. I didn't know what was real anymore. I didn't know if I was losing my mind or if this was really happening. My hands gripped the railing, my knuckles white, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know what was waiting in the basement. The figures didn't move. They didn't speak again, but I could feel their gaze pressing into me, urging me to continue, urging me to come closer. And so I did. I felt a cold sweat on the back of my neck as I descended further into the darkness. The stairs creaked under my weight, groaning as if warning me to turn back. But I couldn't. I couldn't stop now. The music was louder here, more intense, as though it was coming from the very walls themselves, reverberating through my skull, pressing in on me. I could hear every note now, sharp, dissonant, like a twisted lullaby designed to pull me deeper into the abyss. I paused at the bottom of the stairs, the air thick and musty, filled with the scent of dampness and something else, something metallic. I couldn't place it, but it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The darkness in the basement was impenetrable, the only light coming from a single bulb that hung from the ceiling, flickering erratically. It cast strange, warped shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. I squinted into the dark, straining to see anything, to make sense of the oppressive stillness. The figures from the stairwell were gone. Had they ever been there? My mind was playing tricks on me again, I was sure of it. But then I heard it. The sound of movement. A soft shuffle from the far corner of the basement. My pulse quickened and I instinctively took a step back, but I couldn't bring myself to turn away. It was as though something was pulling me toward it, urging me to discover what was hiding in the shadows. The music was louder now, more aggressive. It pushed against my chest, each note a painful jab at my consciousness. It sounded like 1,000 instruments being played in discord, the melody that once seemed so gentle now a violent assault. And then through the clamor I heard the whisper again. Look, it was faint at first, just a breath, but it was enough to send a chill racing down my spine. The voice was different this time, stronger, more urgent. I couldn't help it, I had to look. My legs moved before my mind could catch up, and I found myself walking toward the far corner of the room, my breath shallow, my heart racing. I was nearing the source of the sound. And then I saw it. At first I thought it was just a pile of old boxes, discarded and forgotten in the dark. But as I got closer, I realized that it wasn't just boxes. It was a shape, a body, lying motionless on the cold concrete floor. I stopped dead in my tracks. The body wasn't human. Not entirely. It was wrong. The figure was stretched out on the floor, limbs twisted at impossible angles, and skin that looked pale, almost translucent. I could see veins pulsing beneath the surface, like dark rivers of blood moving under the skin, but there was something wrong with it. Something unnatural. It wasn't breathing. It wasn't moving. But the music came from it. I took a step closer, my feet feeling heavy, as though the air itself was growing thicker, more suffocating with each movement. I could hear the faintest sound of something else now, something soft, rhythmic like a heartbeat, echoing through the space. But it was distorted, warped by the music, as if the very essence of life was being drained from it. I bent down, my fingers trembling as I reached out to touch the body. As my hand made contact with the cold skin, a jolt of electricity shot through me, as if the very energy of the room had passed through my veins. The body twitched. It was alive, somehow impossibly alive. The eyes opened, but they weren't eyes. At least not the way I understood eyes. They were black, hollow, void-like, no pupils, no sclera. Just darkness and endless abyss pulling me in. I gasped, stumbling backward, my breath caught in my throat. My head spun, and the walls of the basement seemed to warp around me, twisting like they were closing in. It's too late. The voice came again, louder this time, resonating in my mind, not through my ears. It wasn't just speaking to me, it was inside me, whispering directly into my thoughts, filling my every cell with dread. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure in front of me began to shift. Its body writhed, contorting in ways that were not possible. It was like watching something move beneath a layer of skin, a grotesque dance that made my stomach churn. I turned to flee, but my legs were rooted to the spot, as if something invisible was holding me down. My heart raced, the music swelling, growing louder and louder until it felt like it would crush my skull. I could see the walls of the basement bending, warping into impossible shapes, the shadows stretching out to claw at me. The whispers grew louder, becoming more distinct, more desperate. Come closer. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was feel the suffocating weight of the room, the music pressing in, the pull of whatever that thing was, dragging me back toward it. And then something changed. The music stopped. The silence was deafening. For a moment, everything was still. My breath, my heartbeat, everything stopped. The figure lay motionless on the floor again, the blackness of its eyes staring into me, unblinking. I didn't understand. I didn't know what was real anymore. But then the music returned. Not the melody. This time it was a scream. A sound that pierced through me, shattering everything. 1,000 voices crying out in agony. And the basement, the whole house, began to shake. The walls cracked. The floor trembled. And then the figure moved. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I ran. I didn't look back. My feet pounded against the concrete floor, the echo of my rapid steps swallowed by the oppressive darkness around me. The music, no, the screaming, continued, louder now, more frantic, like the walls themselves were collapsing under the weight of those tortured cries. My chest tightened with every breath I took, my lungs burning, but I couldn't stop. I had to get out. I ran up the stairs 2 at a time, my hands scraping against the walls as I tried to steady myself. The light at the top of the stairs flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced and twisted in ways that made my head spin. My pulse was deafening in my ears, drowning out everything except the pounding of my heart and the sound of my own breath. I felt like I was being chased, though I couldn't see anything behind me. Still, the feeling was undeniable. Something was there. Something was just a step behind. I reached the door at the top of the stairs, my fingers trembling as I grabbed the handle. It was locked. I yanked at it, panic surging through me as I desperately twisted the knob. My mind raced. Why was it locked? I had come down here so easily before. What had changed? I heard it then, the scraping. The same sound I had heard down below, now unmistakably closer. My heart skipped a beat and I recoiled, my breath shallow. I had to get out. I had to get away from whatever was following me. I stepped back, my body shaking, my mind unraveling. I had no choice. I turned to the window. It was high, too high to reach easily. But there was no time to think. No time to plan. I dashed across the room, grabbing the nearest chair, and shoved it under the window frame. My hands were slick with sweat, my fingers barely able to grip the wood. But I didn't stop. I had to move faster. I scrambled onto the chair, then climbed onto the windowsill, my eyes scanning the darkness outside. The night was still, the air heavy, like it was waiting for something. But I couldn't hear the sound of my breathing anymore. Everything was drowned out by the shrill wailing that seemed to reverberate in my skull. I forced myself to focus. The window was old, the wood creaking as I pried it open. It felt like the house itself was fighting me, reluctant to let me leave. But I pushed harder, the cool night air rushing in as the window finally gave way. I didn't think twice. I jumped. The ground rushed up toward me, and for a second everything went still. I felt weightless. And then impact. My knees buckled as I hit the ground, but I didn't stop. I stumbled forward, the cold grass beneath me sharp, the earth solid and real against my skin. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I ran. I ran through the yard, my breath ragged, my body aching. The music still echoed in my ears, but it was fainter now, as though it was fading, growing distant. I reached the road. The streetlights flickered above, casting a dim, yellow glow over everything. The world seemed too calm, too quiet after the chaos of the basement. But I couldn't trust it. I couldn't trust anything anymore. The phone in my pocket buzzed. I froze. It was a text message. Come back. It was from an unknown number. My pulse raced again. My hand shook as I raised the phone, my finger hovering over the screen. I wanted to delete it, to erase everything and pretend I hadn't seen it. But my eyes were glued to the words. I couldn't look away. You can't escape. The melody always finds you. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the phone away, to forget everything. But I knew deep down I couldn't. Something was wrong. I had escaped the house, but the terror had followed me. It was inside my mind. The melody, those whispers, had never really left. I looked up, and there in the distance, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the road. It was barely visible in the darkness, just a silhouette against the dim glow of the streetlights. I couldn't make out any details, but I didn't need to. I knew what it was. I turned and ran again. My legs burned, my breath came in ragged gasps, but I couldn't stop. Not now. Not ever. I didn't know if I was running from the figure or from myself, but I knew one thing for sure. The nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.